Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I want to apologize in advance. I have terrible allergies, so a little bit of sniffling and my apologies. But, anyways, thank you. Thank you so much for joining me today as we continue our weekly discussions based on the book, The Integral Human Being. And as I like to introduce our study with a notion about the book within the series, within the author, right? So the psychological series or the psychology collection is a 16 book series written by spiritual author Joanna de Angelis in close collaboration with Divaldo Pereira Franco, the very famous Brazilian medium. Joanna de Angelis created this bridge between spiritism and depth psychology, and we'll be discussing some of the issues and even some call to actions or therapies, as she says, right, offered in the book. And if we just consider, if we take stock about how vulnerable we all are, this is the moment that we, as part of this larger community, the humanity as a whole, we are undergoing a lot of pain and suffering. So, this book, specifically the integral human being, is to me a gift, right? Because it discusses certain root causes and some solutions to some of our issues, emotional, psychological, etc. So, my focus here is to bring in this conversation those weekly topics, and the ultimate goal is to understand how can we, as a whole, create a sense of balance, stability, and emotional maturity despite all the noise, all that's going on. But I wanted to take a moment here, if you don't mind, to just discuss before we come to the topic proper. This is a small book. I'm talking about tiny book. It contains 40 chapters, and the chapters are divided into 9 parts. And today's topic is religion and religiosity. I think I put that here. Yes. So, and we are, as you can see, on the end of the third part of the book. The topic, as I mentioned, is religion and religiosity. So it's very interesting because if we start thinking about as we human beings in the attempt to become that integral human being that integrates all parts of who we are, the notion of a discussion about religion and our sense of religiosity is spot on. The book ranges from a wide variety of topics, so it's really interesting to me. And I hope this is a good discussion. And I really hope and invite you to take a moment to drink from this amazing fountain of wisdom. Today's chapter is not even 3 pages, very small, so we should go over quite quickly. If we go to the next page here, where we talk a little bit about authenticity, right? So Joanna begins discussing this theme, this subtopic of authenticity, and she talks about how it stems from within, right? And what is simply a reaction to an external trigger regarding life in general and religion and religiosity in particular. So, right there, we start the chapter with the idea of authenticity countering the notion of how and why we hold on to, as I put my hand in front of my face, those masks. So, just for a context, what is Joanna de Angelis talking about here? Well, Carl Gustav Jung, the famous Swiss psychiatrist, right? Masks are mechanisms used to socially adapt. Simply as that, I need to live, to be absorbed, or to be engaged in part of a subgroup. I use this mask. So he calls mask a aspect of a personality, and the same word mask is persona, right? The word persona originates again mask, but it was a persona where the masks that actors in antiquity, we're talking about Greece and Rome, right? They would use that mask, and they wanted to look like somebody else. But the fact is, as we, psychologically speaking, adopt those masks or those personas, we trick unconsciously, we trick those around us, but unfortunately we end up tricking ourselves, right? Because our masks are an adaptation, therefore it influences, actually it's influenced by our outer world, and it's really, if you think about it, a compromise between our individuality and our society that we belong. But because in reality, the masks, right, the mask that helps us adapt has the double unintended consequence to conceal or obscure who we are, right? Jung describes this phenomenon as the conformity archetype. So, in so many words, it is the it is the public face or the public role that we take on as we present to others as someone different from who we truly are, like the actor and actress in antiquity and ancient theater, right? So what's interesting here to me is I've seen people say, "Oh, this is my. Let me put on my face," and we're talking about makeup, right, or hair, or clothing, or this is my voice that I use at work. So as you can see, it can be very interesting. Consciously, we are aware of it or not, but we take on those masks. So why are we talking about this in this context of religion and religiosity? Well, Joanna de Angeli has this concern that we invest too much time, too much energy pretending to be something instead of just being who we are, right? So if I wanted to be the devil's advocate here and to say, well, I don't know, Joanna, I'm going against your opinion because what about my freedom of expression? And Joanna, in my mind, would respond by saying, yes, Marcia, but at what expense are you exercise your freedom of expression, right? And the fact of the matter, and we talked about this before, actually, we engage in this herd mentality, right? And we do that in so many ways currently. We follow, right? And those influencers that are there that we again consciously or unconsciously follow, again, from the makeup that we use or the way we dress, how we decorate our homes, the car we drive, and those are largely influenced by our society of consumerism and mass media, right? But it also extend to our behavior. So we start to look and sound and look like someone we're not. So it feels like we no longer have our own identity. We are mimicking, we are mirroring, we are repeating the opinions of others in the way that we speak, that we think, and we even adopt certain opinions, specifically now regarding religion and religiosity. That's the topic of the chapter, right? This is expressed if we, for instance, adopt a religion, whatever the label may be, a religion. We adopt it, we say, this is my religion, but we do that without experiencing a sense of religiosity, right? So let's think about it, further breakdown. And forgive me for my voice here. If if uh, if we our personal goal, right? If our personal goal is to feel like, as we adopt that religion, that we really belong to that religious group, and it's something that is really it pushes all of us, right? Not just regarding religion. We will probably do whatever it's necessary to feel accepted. So that's fine, but our religiosity, not our adoption of a religion, but our emotional religiosity, that feeling may become all about the appearance without the without the actual emotional content that would be expected from those behavior, that type of engagement, right? So Joanna calls out that, again, as we engage in any religion, instead of that adaptation to certain behaviors, our goal, and again, she says, a religion, not Christianity, or I don't know, Buddhism, or any, and Buddhism is not categorized as a religion per se, but any type of religion out there. She says when we engage in them, we should be all about working toward our self realization. Okay, so what is the problem here, Joanna? Well, somehow it seems that this idea of a relationship with God that leads to self realization is somehow lost in translation, right? The opportunity of connecting is replaced by this external manifestation of faith that does not have a significant spiritual content or component, and we end up focusing on the expressions, so external expression of our faith, instead of focusing on that inward voyage to really pursue how to grow spiritually closer to God. I hope it makes sense to you. So she starts to talk about this, and she says, those are my words, of course, but we march into the realm of an empty life. So, small parenthesis here. And I mentioned this before because I love how she pepper the same type of content in many different books. But specifically, The Empty Life is the title, Empty Lives is the title of a book that Joanna de Angelis published first in Portuguese, and then it was translated a couple of years later into English. But she first published The Empty Lives, is very interesting, in 2020, 30 years after this publication. So there is this gap, but it's something that is really important for Joanna to talk about, this life of authenticity, right? The notion, on the other hand, of living an empty life that we read in the later book is very much in a very brief statement, but it's present in this chapter, right? So the concern that she brings on both book and chapter is that how our choice to hold on to masks, our free will, right? We have a choice to hold on or not to a given persona, a mask, in order to adapt to a social context, may lead to this sense of emptiness and this sense of hopelessness because we focus on the external instead of the internal, and that is a skin deep, deep, right? There is no depth in our convictions. I just pretend to be. Let's do a little bit of flight of fancy, right? I'm an actor, and I can talk about. To me, my favorite actors or actresses, let's say Meryl Streep, who has received so many Oscars, and if you look at her enormous portfolio of roles, a given person could never be all of it, right? She portrays for a period of time, and it's immortalized somehow in the movie, but it doesn't go beyond the lines and the faces and the behaviors that she adopts for that movie per se. But she says, now back to Joanna, this sense of superficial, right, relationship in religion, we end up undermining the purpose of it all. And we're specifically talking again about religion here because she says every religion, no matter what label, no matter where it stems from, they should provide to all of us human beings on earth a sense of moral comfort, those spiritual values. She also talks about it should address and demystify the idea of death because of that, the spiritual dimension of our lives, right? And awareness of what are or what should be our human values. And I put in the slide. I don't know if you can read in your mobile device, but Joanna is quite harsh, and I will read to you what she says. Right? I wish I could mimic a different voice to be interesting, but I just can't today. I'm so sorry. So she says, instead of castrating prohibition and irrational dogmatism, both aggressive to the freedom of thought and choice, right? Religion should favor the investigation of the tenets of existence, the origins of the human beings and their destination. It should be in collusion with the instruments of science, which is equally interested in researching the world, human beings, and life in greater depth. So, Joanna here, she closely aligns what religions at large should be with what Spiritism is, even though it's not exclusive of anything else outside of Spiritism. This is important for me to say, right? So, uh, back to what we're talking here is that Joanne invites us to have courage, right? So that we're able to break free from any organization, no matter what, that will promote a sense of dependence, right? Or that will promote perhaps that very formulaic, very ritualistic expression of who we are. We should, according to this chapter, look for a place, a temple, an organization, a system, whatever that may be, that will provide to us a platform to really identify, to search, to be in touch with our own consciousness, and as a result, with our own sense of peace. I love it. So, the call to action from Joanna de Angelis is to express ourselves with authenticity, simple as that. And in doing so, we'll be able to grow spiritually. And I have to say, this is not so easy to do, because we must, as we do this, we must have the courage to confront, to review, and to critically analyze our belief systems, our religions, including, and we should be able to find that perfect alignment between our faith, our emotional religiosity, and our religion. I just find it beautiful what she says here. But we move on for another 5 more minutes in our conversation, because then she moves on to the concept of inner freedom when she's talking about religion and religiosity, right? So she talks about our pursuit of alignment between faith, freedom, faith, emotional religiosity, and religion should preserve always our inner freedom, right? And this same pursuit, this search should also promote our growth, because it should lead us to the ability to recognize what we believe in and why do we do that, right? So as we find ourselves becoming, with that courage, with that finding our expression of faith that is aligned to our emotional religiosity, right? And we feel that we are becoming more and more satisfied. We look for the possibilities that are available to us in a very authentic self. The question here is then, right? Let's pause to imagine a little bit. Is, and I don't know if it's a yes or no, but is our original idea of what religion is uh, something that is formal, somber, very reserved, right? Type of religion? Or is our idea of religion some place, some organization, something that is open to work with our inner religiosity, which is again that emotional expression that will bring us to God, will connect us to God in all its facets, right? uh, Question that we can also ask ourselves is, are we able to integrate and relate with that organization, that set of principles, that group of people that will allow us to be complete. I have a sense of wholeness here that will give us a ability to be free, right? And will, instead of leading us to behaviors of I don't know, anxiety, loneliness, or even fear that we encountered previously. And we talk about in the history of mankind, right? And I love Joanna brought him, but I love that she brings Paul, right, as we know, after the road to Damascus, after his transformation from Saul to Paul, that at some point he says, I no longer live, but Christ lives in me, right? And with that, what he's saying is that he lived from that point on, despite of a life that when we study Paul, and I am doing that as we speak, uh, he did not live an easier life when he became Paul. In fact, was much more difficult, right? And he ended up in prison and ended up dying. like many of the other Christians, disciples, and apostles. But he, at that point, he lived a life that was a life that promoted his individuality and replaced that conflicting schemes that he was living through, right? To try to appease his calling, that his family, what he was trying to do, and in the process getting a road full of bodies and terrible things that he's done, trying to fulfill a goal before he became Paul. And when he chooses love, when he chooses peace, when he chooses respect for all humanity, all of it changed, right? So the question here is that when we truly embrace our religiosity, like Paul, and I'm not saying be like Paul and have a very difficult life, but when we do embrace our religiosity, we are free. We are somehow no longer in this immersed in this competition to be what we're not, and this is a fierce competition, this marathon about all the different types of personas that we're in. We instead are focused with the newly, because it's uncovered, inspired accomplishments of your soul, of yourself. If we don't, what happens? Well, we live a life hiding, right? We live a life somehow camouflaging all of our needs, and somehow we get lost, quote unquote, lost by the needs and expectations of our society. And again, Paul is a great example. He was such a loyal, committed Saul, but he was lost in the needs of that organization that was not in sync to who he truly was. So, if we think about, unfortunately, right, when we think about the inauthentic individual, and inauthentic because it is somebody trying to be engaged, being part of a social group. That inauthentic individual often, more often than we think, are somehow discovered, they're spotted, and often actually rejected by the actual social group that he or she's trying to be part of. So if you think about our inauthentic selves, really have no power. We are not who we are. We are being inauthentic. We're trying to be part of a group, but we're really not, and the group will end up often rejecting us. And from that perspective, trying to conform to social norms and the group, we end up losing ourselves, losing our sense of identity. And the social group, as anything, right? One reflects the other. If that social group is full of individuals like us, inauthentic us, masked us, trying to be what we're not, that group does not have that collective consciousness either. And what we mean by that is a social group. And I'm not talking about specific religion, but any group that we want to be part of does not have values. The members of these groups are led to, uh, you know, experience behaviors that are really not, again, authentic, but they may not require that ethical courage that when we are authentic, we display. And it is a vicious cycle, right? The group influences the members influence the group, but if we wrap it all up, is we can see the immaturity. We're talking about psychological immaturity. We talk about spiritual immaturity of that given social group, which is evidenced by this lack of freedom to be ourselves, and the lack of commitment and responsibility toward a real goal. I hope this makes sense to you. We're going to wrap it up now with a final discussion of inner realization, right? Inner authenticity and inner freedom all lead to this goal that Joanna de Angelis talks about. This is the goal of any religion. It should be our ability to self-realize. And to do that, Joanna says, oh, we must have courage. Courage to be ourselves, courage to be fair, courage to seek a sense of balance. And at the same time, she says to do that, we may have to take risks, right? There is a sense of adventure in that, because for us to look, to seek, we have to have that courage to embrace all that we are and also embrace life. Right, and I love it because she talks about a sense of self accomplishment really is necessary, right, for this life that is full of the components that we have to do, but we do it with courage, meaning that I will, if I am alone with myself or alone in that social group that I don't really belong, what do I want to do? What is our sense of uh, self? And Joanna actually says, yes, it's okay to be nervous. It's okay to even be anxious, right? That sense of fear, of anxiety when we are looking, when we're searching, when we are trying to embrace life, is a component of everybody's reality. But there's this little thing, just kidding, right? That Joanna refers to as, and it's a big theme. I love one day just to spend an hour talking about, which is the idea of the ancestral atavisms, right? What we bring in that collective unconscious that is part of the entire humanity regarding religion, right? Those heritage centers all of us, humanity needs to a religious belief that is rooted on behaviors from our primitive cousins of earlier time on earth, and we're talking about really really primitive. We're talking about based on fear of thunder, fear of fire, right, fear of the chaotic forces of nature. And at once upon a time, we human beings needed to appease that fury of those primitive gods with a certain cults, maybe dancing, maybe singing, and those cults became, throughout the history of mankind, uh, became a certain adopted behavior as part of religious, and those throughout our lifetimes became increasingly more complex and more sophisticated. So you can imagine, right? If we just close our eyes for just a minute, at some point, in order to appease the fury of gods, we actually engaged in human sacrifice, right? We engaged in animal sacrifice. We engaged and this is still very common today, in our financial sacrifice. Uh, and right, Joanna states that the evolution of our expressions of faith, there's this transfer of an entire psychological and sociological heritage that has been seen through generations and generations, that produce this natural religious sentiment that remains in all humanity to date, right? So if you think about, and we're going to talk about later in the future chapters, we can talk about how we express that that things that seeps through who we are, and we don't know why, but we are called upon doing it. But when we consider our spiritual origin and this creative force in the universe, and this is very poetic to say, but the seed of religiosity remains in us, awaiting for the ground, that fertile ground, when the sentiment of religiosity is flourished. And she also, I love that we've seen this in many many books in spiritism, right? But the sense of that our own intrinsic feeling of religiosity that is in many of us still in as a seed to bloom later, they can also be translated into our intellectual moral content in our expressions, to include maybe scientific thought, arts, philosophy, and of course, religion. So, if we think about, as we're closing to an end here of this chapter, if we combine all those needs that we're moving toward this integration of consciousness uh, to one that is Joanna's words, a cosmic one. And this creative force which exists in each of us as a spark, according to Joanna, possesses, this is beautiful, possesses the potential of a star that will expand with the possibilities given to it. I just love this analogy that the seed of religiosity can be ignited into this beautiful star. And if well guided, the light from this star can eliminate the shadow and become the actual vitalizing energy for the growth of all of our values and all our fulfillment and our real destiny. So, our goal, simply said, is perhaps to win over ourselves, to overcome our challenges and our need to belong when we're need to let go, right? Forget, forgo of our authenticity, and it is all about understanding from that seed all of our potentiality and be able to start to those are my words, to execute on those potentiality. And in the, if you were a religious leader, now we flip the side, in the execution of a religious program, right? Many of those religious leaders act by following a certain convention, and be it because it's convenient, or be it because that's what's given to them, or be it because if not, they'll be rejected by the larger group. But if we are simply adopting those formulaic notions of religion, and that will please that religious leader or others before him or her, and or that conform to a historically approved expression of faith. Let's think about it, right? When we do this in lieu of exercising our real expressions of faith, and bringing consolation, we are just falling to the trap of conformism. And I close with saying that a medieval monk, and it's in the book, right? A medieval monk said, "Whoever lives life dying each and every time never actually dies when death finally arrives." So, what this medieval monk was discussing was this idea of detaching ourselves from what hold us prisoners. And that includes our imperfections, our addictions, our obsessions, but also that conformity to what is expected from a society. So, in conclusion, our religiosity is not about adopting a religion. It is independent of an external form. It is about this inner realization, and it can only be done when we are courageous and have the oomph to be who we truly are. I just want to say thank you for being with me today. And as we wrap up this conversation, I invite you to join me in the next chapter when we'll discuss insecurity and crisis of society, which is the first chapter of the next part, the fourth part of the book. But with that, I want to say thank you and see you next time. Bye bye.